Hello, listeners, and welcome back to Everyday Health Stories, the podcast where we explore the fascinating world of medical science through the power of storytelling. Joining us today is Dr. Kota Reddy, a highly respected cardiologist and wellness expert with a unique approach to health that goes beyond traditional medicine. Dr. Reddy is known for his expertise in preventive cardiology and metabolic health, helping patients achieve remarkable transformations by addressing the root causes of their health issues. With a passion for empowering patients, he combines cutting-edge medical insights with practical lifestyle strategies, making complex topics easy to understand and apply. In this episode, he's here to shed light on a fascinating topic: why weight loss medications fail, the hidden impact of insulin and leptin resistance. Welcome back, Dr. Reddy.
Thanks so much, Anna. I'm really excited to dive into this topic because, it's something I see in my practice literally every day. And there's so much confusion out there about why these medications work differently for different people.
Oh, I'm super interested in this because I've been hearing so much about Ozempic and Mounjaro lately, like everywhere I turn. And it seems like some people are having amazing results while others not so much.
That's right. What's fascinating is that we're actually seeing this huge variation in how people respond to these medications. And there's like a really good scientific explanation for why this happens.
Before we dive deeper, Dr. Reddy, let's take a moment to remind our wonderful listeners to hit pause and subscribe to the podcast. By subscribing, you'll get notified of new episodes, gain access to exclusive content, and join a community that's making positive changes one story at a time. So, Dr. Reddy, what exactly makes these medications work differently for different people? I'm really curious about the science behind it.
Well, it actually comes down to something called insulin resistance. Like when we look at the data from my patients, those who have obesity with insulin resistance tend to do incredibly well on these medications.
That's super interesting. But could you explain what insulin resistance actually is?
Of course. So think of insulin as, it's like a key that unlocks your cells to let sugar in. When you have insulin resistance, your cells become kind of stubborn, They don't respond to insulin as well as they should. And what's really interesting is that most people who are gaining weight actually have some form of insulin resistance, even if it hasn't been officially diagnosed yet.
That's fascinating. So does that mean everyone who's gaining weight might have insulin resistance?
Not everyone, but you know what? A surprisingly high number do. What I've found in my practice is that, even people with what we call subclinical insulin resistance, meaning it's not severe enough to show up on standard tests, they often respond really well to medications like Mounjaro and Ozempic.
Oh, wow. So that's why some people see such dramatic results?
Exactly. You see, these medications, they work by targeting the same pathways that are affected by insulin resistance. So when someone has insulin resistance, the medication can help sort of reset things, if you will. It's like giving their metabolism a fresh start.
And this is something you've seen consistently in your practice?
Absolutely. The pattern is pretty clear, Patients with insulin resistance who start these medications, they often experience significant weight loss, and they typically handle the medications really well. But, and this is important, there's actually another factor that can completely change how someone responds to these medications.
Oh, what's this other factor? You've got me really curious now.
Well, it's something called leptin resistance, and let me tell you, it's absolutely fascinating. You see, leptin is like your body's natural appetite control system, right? It's supposed to tell your brain when you've had enough food.
So it's like our body's built-in portion control?
Exactly. That's a great way to put it. But here's where it gets really interesting. When someone develops leptin resistance, it's like, imagine your brain's wearing noise-canceling headphones. It just can't hear those "I'm full" signals anymore.
That must make weight loss super challenging.
You're absolutely right. And what I've seen in my practice is that patients who have severe leptin resistance, they often really struggle with these medications. Like they might take Mounjaro or Ozempic and, sometimes they don't lose any weight at all.
No weight loss at all? That's not good.
I know, right? And here's the thing that's really crucial to understand. When we have a patient who has both insulin resistance and leptin resistance, it's like their body's fighting against itself. The insulin resistance part, that actually makes the medications work better, but the leptin resistance can completely block their effectiveness.
So how do you figure out if someone has leptin resistance?
That's such an important question. In my practice, I've learned to look for specific signs. Things like constant hunger especially after meals, difficulty feeling satisfied, and particularly stubborn weight that just won't budge despite doing everything right. But there's more to it, and the causes, well, they're pretty fascinating.
So, what exactly causes this leptin resistance? I mean, it sounds like such a huge factor in weight loss.
You know, there are three major causes I see all the time in my practice. The first one, well, it's actually something that might surprise you: sleep apnea. And I'm talking about uncorrected sleep apnea here.
Sleep apnea, really? How does that work?
So here's the fascinating thing. The more severe someone's sleep apnea is, right, the more resistant they become to leptin. I had this patient and they were doing everything right with their diet, but they just couldn't lose weight. Turned out their sleep apnea was the culprit.
Oh, wow. So what's the second cause?
The second one is something we all deal with: psychological stress. Like when you're stressed, your body pumps out cortisol, and that cortisol just, well, it really messes with your leptin sensitivity.
Ah, so being stressed actually affects how our body processes weight loss medications?
Yes, and then there's the third cause, which is probably the most common one I see: sugar and starch consumption. But here's what's really interesting. It's especially the fructose that's the problem. That's the sugar you find in, like, sweets and fruits.
Even fruits can cause this?
Yes, but here's the thing. Processed sugars are much worse than natural fruits. And what I've noticed in my practice is that when patients consume a lot of these sugars, they're basically, well, they're creating a perfect storm for both insulin and leptin resistance.
That's fascinating. So these three factors, sleep, stress, and sugar, they're all interconnected?
Absolutely. And you know what's really interesting? Sometimes patients have all three factors working against them at once. Like they're stressed, so they eat more sugar, which affects their sleep, and it just becomes this vicious cycle, right?
Okay, so what can people actually do about this? Like, how do we fix leptin resistance?
You know, I'm really glad you asked that because there are several effective strategies we can use. Let me break it down. First and foremost, if someone has sleep apnea, they absolutely need to get that corrected. Like, that's non-negotiable.
And what about the stress component? That seems like a big one.
Right. So for stress, we need a multi-pronged approach. I usually recommend counseling to my patients, but it's not just that. It's also about making those lifestyle modifications, you know, getting better sleep habits and really focusing on stress reduction techniques.
That makes so much sense. What about diet? I'm guessing that's pretty crucial too.
Oh, absolutely. The key is eliminating sugar and starch from your diet. But here's something that's been working incredibly well in my practice: implementing different types of fasting protocols.
Fasting? That sounds kind of intense.
Well, it's actually more flexible than you might think. We've got different options like intermittent fasting, time-restricted eating, or even prolonged fasting of 2-3 days for some patients. And the results, they're just remarkable.
How long does it usually take to see improvements?
So here's the really encouraging part. When patients follow these steps consistently, they can start seeing significant improvements in their leptin levels within about 4 to 6 weeks. Like, I had this patient who was really struggling with weight loss medications, but once we addressed their leptin resistance, well, the transformation was amazing.
Just 4 to 6 weeks? That's not long at all.
Not at all. And you know what's really exciting? Once we get that leptin resistance under control, these weight loss medications like Mounjaro and Ozempic, they start working so much better. It's like unlocking a door, right? The medications can finally do their job properly.
These results sound incredible, but I'm guessing consistency is key here?
Absolutely. The key is sticking to these changes consistently. And what I always tell my patients is that it's not about perfection, it's about progress, making these changes step by step.
I've been hearing a lot about side effects with these medications. What's really going on there, Dr. Reddy?
You know, this is such an important point to discuss because there's been some confusion about it. The interesting thing about GI side effects, like severe constipation, well, they're actually more related to dosing and genetic factors than anything else.
Oh, that's different from what I expected. So it's not connected to insulin or leptin resistance?
Right. The side effects are really more about how your body processes the medication. But here's what's fascinating. While the GI issues aren't connected to leptin resistance, the actual weight loss results absolutely are.
Could you explain that a bit more?
So, you know, I've seen patients in my practice who have severe leptin resistance, and despite being on these medications for months, they just don't lose weight, like at all. And that's because the leptin resistance is basically blocking the medication's effectiveness.
Wow, that must be so frustrating for them.
Yes, but here's the thing that gives us hope. When we identify leptin resistance early, we can address it right away. I've had patients who were struggling with the medications, but once we tackled their leptin resistance head-on, well, the results were just remarkable.
That's reassuring. So it's really about identifying the underlying issue?
Absolutely. And what's really exciting is that we can usually tell pretty quickly if leptin resistance might be the culprit. Like, if someone's not responding to the medication as expected, we can start addressing those factors we talked about earlier right away.
So, it seems like we've covered so many important points today. Dr. Reddy, could you share some final thoughts for our listeners who might be struggling with weight loss medications?
You know, Anna, the key takeaway here is that if you're not seeing results with medications like Mounjaro or Ozempic, don't get discouraged. The most important thing is identifying if leptin resistance might be holding you back.
And we can actually do something about that, right?
Absolutely. Like I always tell my patients, focus on those 3 main areas we discussed. Get your sleep apnea checked, manage your stress levels, and really work on cutting down those sugars and starches. Combined with some form of fasting, you could see improvements in just 4 to 6 weeks.
Before we wrap up today's episode of Everyday Health Stories, I want to remind our amazing listeners that this podcast is for informational purposes only and isn't a substitute for professional medical advice. Always consult your healthcare provider for any medical concerns.
And you know what? I just want to emphasize that success with weight loss is totally possible when we address the root causes. It's not just about the medication. It's about understanding your body's unique needs.
This has been incredibly enlightening. A huge thank you to Dr. Reddy for sharing your insights and helping us all better understand how insulin and leptin resistance can affect the effectiveness of weight loss medications.
Thank you, Anna, and thank you to all our listeners for joining us today. Remember, taking control of your health doesn't have to be overwhelming. Small, consistent changes can make a big difference over time. Stay curious, stay proactive, and don't hesitate to seek out the information and support that can guide you on your journey. Until next time, keep listening, keep learning, and keep moving forward toward a healthier life.
Beautifully said, Dr. Reddy. And with that, we'll see you all next time on Everyday Health Stories. Stay well, everyone.